Oh, sorry, I was muted. Yes. One more second. Yes.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Mushiri Nyaga from the Local Development Research Institute in Nairobi, Kenya, part of the Data for Development Network. And you're joining us on this dialogues for the state of, on the state of open data. This is an interesting time to be working on open data. The evolution is now well into, I don't know, 15 years now, I think, in terms of the work that has been done by the partners of the Open Data for Development Network, now the Data for Development Network. This state of open data conversation is is based on a report initially published in 2019. And the State of Open Data report really did work to give us a sense of what has happened since in 10 years of the open data community's journey up till 2019. But one of the things we asked ourselves after a few years is it's good to figure out, what has changed, what has improved, what has not, since that first edition of the State of Open Data report. And then as a community of researchers, of advocates and activists, we've been working on putting together these new perspectives to see what has changed since the last edition of the State of Open Data report. Our co-chairs for this State of Open Data dialogues have been chapter authors, have worked on these issues for a long time. So I'm delighted to be welcoming you to this session for this last quarter of the year, which is on government finances. Government finances has been one of the oldest domains in which open data has been active. It's been a very active area for all of the open data history that we can master. And we, of course, have seen what public finances have looked like before COVID and post-COVID. There's been a lot of questions in the global south, in the West, everywhere in the world, really, about how governments are managing their finances, how are we doing in terms of opening up that data, etc. So I'm delighted to introduce Jorge Flórez from Global Integrity, who will be hosting this session together with his illustrious panel of domain experts. He is most interested in finding ways to support partners in their efforts to solve local problems through the use of data, evidence, and innovation. And prior to joining Global Integrity, Jorge worked with the Results for Development Institute and the National Democratic Institute. He also advised the Colombian government on citizen participation and conducted research on governance, social movements, and environmental management. So thank you so much, Jorge, for joining us. And I can't tell you how sad we were to hear the news about Global Integrity. A few weeks ago. We're still in mourning, but we are convinced that some of this work that you've done for so many years continues to have an impact and continues to live on in the work we're doing. And of course, we know you're going nowhere. You're still going to be here, still working with us, maybe wearing a different hat. So we're delighted that you're still here. Welcome, Jorge. Over
Thanks,
to you.
Muchiri. Thanks, Muchiri, and thank you to the Data for Development Network for inviting me to writing the update to this chapter, taking on for Cecile Lewen, and also for the one on anti-corruption and accountability, which we had a session several months ago. It's an honor to be here, and as you say, it's sad the news about global integrity, but things continue and will continue working on these important issues. I'm very happy to have in here with me and in the conversation with us and everyone, Aura Martínez, who is the coordinator for knowledge, technical assistance, and collaboration at the Global Initiative for Fiscal Transparency, Camila Salazar, who is the head of data analytics and learning from the Open Contracting Partnership, and Oluseun Onigbinde, who is the global director for the Budget Foundation. Basically, the way in which the session is going to work is I'm going to first do a quick, very short introduction on the issue, and on the state of the data on government finances, basically reading on different sources of research, but mainly on the Global Data Barometer, which was published recently. And then we'll have 2 rounds of conversation with our panelists to explore different issues on the publication of these government finances and the use of it. And then we'll have a broader conversation and continue to talk. So for starting with what's the state of government finances now, it's important to say that it has improved in the last few years thanks to the sustained technical support and increased availability of resources that have gone into supporting the countries, to providing technical support, to developing different ways and tools so they can improve the publication of the data and strengthen the communities of peer learning among these, the people publishing and the people using the data. There are many benefits associated with increasing fiscal transparency, related to the budget. There is things related in the evidence about improving budget quality, governance and development outcomes, also enhance electoral accountability and improving public trust, also improving the allocation of public resources, decreasing the cost of borrowing money for governments and improving the revenue generation. And also there are some evidence of increase on foreign direct investment attractiveness for the countries that are publishing more and better information. That's also similar for the open contracting. There are other kind of 4 important things that the open contracting can have as an effect, improving that information, and is saving money and increasing government efficiency, improving the quality of public services delivery, leading to greater and fairer competition among firms and in the sectors, and strengthening the integrity and reducing the opportunities to corruption. There is, like, as Mushiri was saying, of the fiscal transparency has been really high in the open data agenda and the open government agenda. And in the recent report on 10 years of the Open Government Partnership, they found that commitments to improve fiscal transparency and are some of the main ones leading to important results within the open government agenda. And they also highlight that the open contracting in particular increases the chances for countries of achieving early results, which all of this is good. And we have seen the growth and the improvement in the area, but there are many challenges still remaining. Many of these challenges, as Muchiri was saying, were highlighted by the COVID pandemic. In the COVID pandemic, different assessments found issues. For instance, the International Budget Partnership found an accountability gap, where really there was a lack of publication of information of a budget specifically related to COVID-19 spending and use. And there was also reports by the Open Contracting Partnership and Open Beneficial Ownership, who found that there was some data publication in regards to the commitments made by governments during COVID-19 on publishing open contracting and beneficial ownership data, but this information was had many gaps, had many issues, and didn't really enable people to see how funds were used, and most importantly, how to use that information to reduce corruption and improve other things in the response to the pandemic. In addition to that, there is like only 30% of the countries publish information in open formats for budget data, and there is still an important push to be made in publication of amended budgets, on spending by public corporations, on information about financial transactions and expenditures, and the use of government's extra-budgetary funds. And in terms of the open contracting, although there is also wider publication of some data, especially on tender and award of contracts, there is less on planning of the procurement process. There is much more less in terms of the implementation of the contracts, and there are still challenges or important challenges in terms of connecting these different phases and being really able to use the money to detect corruption or assess value for money. There are some important improvements and increasing advances on improving the use of the data, and there are some interesting and innovative ways that have arisen and have consolidated in the last few years. One is the publication and the use of data, especially budget data for cross-cutting programs and issues such as sustainable development goals, climate action, and gender budgeting. And there are also some experiments trying to use budget trackers and publication and use of data on investment projects, which is interesting to see how to this can improve the publication and the use of the data. And in procurement, there are different things, especially around the development of dashboards, which has increased the use of data for doing red flag analysis, different approaches, combining data and other strategies to improve the access of procurement to procurement opportunities by marginalized groups, and to support the sustainable procurement as an emerging area to use procurement data. So to not only make procurement better, but also to make it more green and more contributing to the energy transition and climate change and other important things. One thing that I will highlight as needing to continue to advance on this area and to improve how data is published is we need to, as has been said, bring politics into the equation and move it, the understanding of that beyond achieving the political will for increased openness, which has been high, into how can the information be used and how can the dynamics be improved for that use. So different efforts can improve the information, can improve effective decision making that leads to better actions, to prevent corruption, and to explore the new and innovative ways to use the data. I will leave it at that. The most important things come from our panelists. But before going to them, I'll leave to one question to the audience. You can put your comments in the your answers in the comments. So the question for the audience is, what are the biggest changes you have seen in relation to open data on government finances? What has been important to you? What is the main things that you would like to highlight? And now moving to our panelists. So Aura, Camila, and Oluseun. We will really love to hear your thoughts and your impressions on what are the political and policy factors that have been most relevant to increase the interest in availability and use of data on government finances. So I will go first to Aura. Aura, what do you have to say?
Hi, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here. I'm Aura from the Global Initiative for Fiscal Transparency. And I do think that there's a couple of things in terms of public finances that have changed in the last 10 years, as mentioned, that have pushed for this open data availability at this point. It's also important to mention, as Jorge highlighted, from the Global Data Barometer most recent edition, which participated in the configuration of the public finance module that has two components, one on governance and one in availability. It's the component in the Global Data Barometer that it's most advanced, and that it's more what that would mean is that there is more more data on public finance available thanks to the actions on the government around the world as a global trend than in any other of the Global Data Barometer's modules. This is important because it would seem, and many countries have political movements and civil society demands not having this precise impression. But I do think that this is exactly what has pushed for the government to open the data. The push from civil society, organized civil society especially, coming from a long time now of distrust in governments, that then was highlighted by the COVID pandemic and the Russian invasion, that highlighted the scarcity of resources. There increased the need for accountability on what resources were being used to. And also this distrust of governments came alongside with new, since 2008, but now even further down in the road, new patterns of economic stagnance, increasing inflation, and other economic phenomena that highlight even further the need for accountability and to know what resources are being used, but not only the expenditures, also what our governments are doing about their lending practices, their borrowing practices, and how they are using financial instruments to get financial flows going. In that sense, there is another political force that has been very important for the openness of information in the case of public finances as a whole. It's the requirements from lenders and borrowers that have been in place. For example, the IMF and the World Bank have increased their requirements for transparency associated with loans, and we've seen this happen very, very, very importantly for loans derived from the COVID pandemic to development countries, especially in Africa, but also all around the world. How this increased openness have been part of the terms. Also, there's evidence that countries that have more open data available to the public in standardized formats have better debt ratings by rating companies. So all of these type of financial incentives affect specifically the realm of public finance open data, which then you can further see in the trends of the Global Data Barometer being the highest, because you have both the incentives from the public, the civil societies, especially organized civil society, both in the finance area, but also in the open data movements, pushing hardly for this information as cross-cutting information that affects all types of agendas, gender, open, sustainable development, climate change mitigation, and so on. Budgets and finances affect all of them. So it's a cross-cutting topic. Finally, a very important push that it's a little bit more of a historic one, but we still see it's, it reaping fruits, is standardized ways of collecting information. So the transition to accrual accounting and standardized methods for public financial management systems being still what allows or keeps many countries either in the forefront or in the backwards of publishing information. Many countries do have political will to put information out there, and I'm sure it's the case for open contracting as well. But there is not capabilities, not only in terms of human capital, but mostly on systems and software, hardware capital, and investment capital in these type of technologies that would allow very easily to put information forward. And this is still the reason many countries are backwards. And finally, the last, but not the least, that we've seen very importantly in the Global Data Barometer trend, and that we are seeing as we see our governance changing their priorities from openness, transparency, and the post-truth that came after some of the populists, both in the United States, but also in the many countries era, and that we are seeing coming back, is that the legal frameworks, even when they are strong in terms of access to information in many countries, still are not specific enough to keep public finance information protected from backlashes in terms of transparency. And that we have seen in many countries that when certain type of leadership comes to office, this is some of the first data that comes down or stops being as updated, as disaggregated, or as standardized as we would like it to be. And this is still because of the information. The governance frameworks are not as strong, so it's more of a de facto availability that makes the information publicly available, but not really the strength of the law or the governance framework, and it's then very vulnerable to backlashes in authorities depending on their specific agenda, which we all know that we are suffering from a very big distrust in democracy and stated institutions, which are bringing new types of leaderships or all types of leaderships, that are not put very forefront and don't put transparency and open data as an important agenda. So I think with that, I will close my intervention here. I'm looking forward to hear your impressions as well.
Thank you, Aura. Now, I'm happy to move to Camila. Camila, what are your reactions to that question?
So thank you so much, Jorge, and everyone who joined today. So I'm Camila, and as Jorge said, I work for the Open Contracting Partnership. We're a non-for-profit working on different countries across all continents on helping partners think differently about procurement. And that entails helping them open procurement data, but also opening that data to drive impactful reforms. And as we've discussed already, we know that mostly all governments in the world collect information on public procurement. The difference is that in some cases, that information is still not digitized, and even if it's available in a system or in a database, sometimes it's not publicly available for others to see. So what we try to do in practice, and what we've seen that has worked for us to increase the interest and the availability of open data specifically on public procurement, is something that we call like the open contracting framework or approach, which basically has like 4 key elements that we've seen that if they're implemented in practice, it helps not only increasing data availability, but to make it sustainable over time. So I guess the first key thing is that when we work with partners on these types of reforms, it's really key to having clear reform goals and obtaining the right political support for these initiatives. So it's not only to follow up a mandate to publish data, but having a clear goal on how that openness could lead to a specific policy goal. So for instance, if a partner has a really clear policy goal on increasing inclusion in public procurement, then how do you make that goal very clear? And then how do you work towards opening that data to achieve that goal? So that goal-driven approach, I think, is the first key thing that we've seen that is key. It helps when you have robust political mandates and high-level political leadership that it's sustained, then these reforms are more likely to succeed and be sustainable over time. The second key thing, it relates specifically about data. So what we try to do is not just only help governments opening the data, but making sure that the data that is being disclosed, first, it's comprehensive, that we try to disclose as much information as possible on public procurement. So as Jorge was highlighting, we see that a lot of countries, maybe on public procurement, they only disclose information on the tender and award stages, but we help government think about the full cycle of procurement from the planning to the implementation of the contracts. So it's key to open as much data as possible so that you'll be able to track government finances, and also data that has good quality and that is it's really focused on key use cases, because we know that having a data set just published, it does not lead to change. So it's really key when opening the data to be really clear about the use cases, and that also ties to the broader goals. Then the third thing that I think I would mention as well is that it's key for this open data initiatives and broader political reforms that it's not something that happens it's not a one-sided effort. We've seen that these efforts are more sustainable when you have clear and a good multi-stakeholder collaboration and engagement. So what we try to do when we work with partners is that we normally work with a government partner, but also working with civil society and trying to create those feedback loops between the government, the private sector, and civil society, so that you create these feedback mechanisms and also a community of data users that at the end will help to make these reforms sustainable. So it's not just building this robust ecosystem, I would say. And then finally, I think a key thing is that how do you institutionalize those reforms so that they can survive political transitions And I think that is a key thing on this initiatives is that when, let's say, when we work with partners on a specific project that has a clear goal, where you have the data, when you have people using the data, and then at the end of that intervention, you're able to track and measure the impact and the results of those interventions, it's easier to institutionalize those reforms and then continue on improving. So that constant cycle, that is not just I publish the data set to comply with an international standard and I have the data set available, but rather it's an effort that where you have a clear goal, you're able to use data to track it, to achieve it, you have a good ecosystem of partners, and then you're able to prove the impact of those reforms. I think those 4 key elements is what we've seen that has worked best. In some cases, we have partners that are best at doing a couple of these 2 things, but when we have all those 4 elements, I think we've documented good impacts and progress in the field that I encourage you to see, and I can speak a bit more in a bit if you're interested.
Thank you, Camila, for those points and highlighted that process. Oluseun, well, please, coming with your experience, also working like in Nigeria, in many countries in Africa, and at the global level, what do you have to say?
Sorry. Hello, can you hear me now? Yeah, perfect.
Yes.
I have a new laptop, so the microphone still messes me up a little bit. It's a pleasure being here today. And thanks so much, Camila. Thanks, Aura, and thanks, George, for inviting me for this session. I will speak about budgets. We'll be running for 12 years, based in West Africa specifically. We are focused in Nigeria, Ghana, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Senegal. Our mission is primarily that public resources, especially public finances, should be simple, should be accessible to all, and citizens, it's in their own self-enlightened interest, should hold government accountable on the basis of that. So when we talk about open data, we are looking at it from 4 different lenses. We are asking ourselves, is it comprehensive? That means, is it detailed enough for us to make meaning of? So because we want to see data at the meta level that people can engage and can build conversations upon. Secondly, we care about accuracy. Is it a true representation of things? Do we need to question it much more? Do we need to poke it much more? So we're big on the fact that data has to be accurate. Third is about actionable. Do we see, even if it's comprehensive, even if it's accurate, we want to make sure that it's actionable. We can give it to the hands of citizens and they can run with it. They can demand accountability. They can see themselves in the data. We don't want to see construction of roads, 40 billion naira. We want to see construction of XYZ road in my local neighborhood. So that gives people a sense of feeling that public finances mean a lot to them and they see themselves in it. And the fourth thing that we care about is timeliness. We also care about the fact that data must be produced in time so that people are not chasing after a bus that moved. We want to be clear that quarterly report, performance reports, budget data, proposed budget data, and everything that's within the public finance chain should follow a certain sequence, and so that citizens can engage with it. Our interest heavily on open data is about citizen engagement and institutional response. So we look at ourselves being in that intersection to make sure that we can break it down, we can simplify it, we can open them to those available channels, and we can now connect their voices to the government. And hopefully we can have a close feedback loop where citizens and government are in this embrace and this interaction, which we believe is very essential into a functional democracy. We expanded our work to Sierra Leone, Liberia, Ghana, and Senegal. We started with the first cohort of Ghana, Sierra Leone, Liberia in 2020, and we expanded to Senegal last year. And something we are learning, one is that no 2 countries are the same. So we are not trying to sell solar lanterns, or we're not trying to sell a cheaper weather system. This is rooted in governance. So we're also very, very clear that nuance, context, cultural norms, and all of that are very, very critical. So we also pride that when it comes to open data, there must be some high level of active listening. So we don't jump into this country and just start programming. We take a year to learn, listen, and before we understand what exactly is the biggest opportunity to excite citizen interest, because we don't just want to publish open data. And I think that's something that the open data movement would have to contend with. Is just not about publishing, it's that the usability of what is published and also what exactly is transforming and changing. The second thing after we do active listening is robust community engagement. We also believe that robust ecosystems have to be built around open data citizen movement, civil society, media, religious institutions, government agencies. There has to be some ecosystem around the data to make sense of it and to use their power to demand much more explanation or improvement, or even to just ask for much more things. So we also heavy on citizen engagement and stakeholder management at the end of the day. And that's in those spaces that we find partnerships, like maybe media as a partner, or maybe another bigger nonprofit within that space as a partner. Finally, it's that when we look at open data, we want to be able to measure impact in terms of what exactly the impact that we are. So impact measurement is big on our minds. We want to ask ourselves, is our end to engage citizens, to be much more active citizens? Is our end to fight corruption? Is our end to expose insensitivity of the political class? So we are critical about our mission to do that. In budget, we built some tools that are very critical. So one of the tools we built is Tracker, which tracks public projects. We believe that public budgets in Nigeria cannot just be a sterile document. It has to be a living piece in the minds of people. So we built a platform to track public projects. And Tracker is really, really big in Nigeria. Every single day they put at least 20 tweets around public sector tracking in Nigeria, and it's huge. I mean, we're practically putting the country in some form of crisis currently, because some of the procurement data was uncovered by an opposition politician, and a lot of people are coming back to budget and Tracker for much more interpretation of things. So that's one of the key things we do. We also open up spending data. So we'll build a tool, and I'll put the links in the chat. We build a tool because we looked at budget data. Is great to have budget data, but it's also a good thing to have spending data, which is the actual spend. So the Nigerian government built a solution that tracks public spending. It's called, and they call it opentreasury.gov.ng. But it was a very difficult site to navigate. So what we did was to build a crawling platform on top of that solution, and that's now what we call GovSpend. So GovSpend crawls data from the Nigerian government website and is able to give it to people in a much more simple and accessible form. So you now see that GovSpend.ng. So you now see that actual spending data. And what you now see is my final point is you now begin to see journalists, civil society triangulating this data. So you have a state level data, you have the budget data, you have the actual spending data, you have the procurement data, you also have the beneficial registers, the beneficial ownership register. So you now have journalists, citizen journalists connecting the dots together, which for me should be the end goal for open data, is that we have to join data together so that we can be able to get much more insight and to deliver much more impact. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Oluseun. And there are great points of what has been mentioned, like just highlighting some the mention of the now more attention paid to borrowing and lending and how to make that available and how to make that something relevant. Also the framework that Camila said that the open contracting uses for promoting these reforms and supporting these reforms, and the special interest that she mentioned on the reform goals and how that can really promote or really propel the transformation, and also the very important points made by Oluseun in terms of the things that they pay attention on the data, especially the accuracy of it and how actionable it is, also timeliness, and the different tools that they are mentioning in terms of how to make data not just be there, but being available and being used by people, and several of the examples that he made about political actors, journalists, civil society using that information to promote the conversation and to advance accountability. We had one comment in the or response to the first question sent by, please forgive me for the pronunciation, Maciej, in terms of the importance of using standards and how they can enable the cooperation between many participants. And I think that several of our panelists have highlighted that point. So thanks for that, Maciej. And with that, another question to the audience, and is what has helped you in your efforts to make progress in relation to open data on government finances? Are you having similar experiences to what our panelists are sharing or not? Or do you have another points to raise? Please leave your questions or your answers in the chat. And with that, I would like to move to the second question for the panelists. And it is, what relevant innovations in relation to opening and using data on government finances would you like to highlight? What else is needed to move this agenda forward and to propel it more into the future? And please, let's go with Camila. Camila.
Yeah, so I think a key thing that we've seen is that we all work with a public data set on government finances, and I guess a key thing is that we need to see, in our case, procurement, not only as a government function, but as an engine for innovation and inclusion for public services. So we've seen in the field that some of the most recent, innovative cases of use of open data related to procurement, it can be a key tool to achieve the SDG goals and can support more sustainable environmental procurement and inclusive communities. So I wanted to highlight 3 cases that I think are interesting in that regard. I guess the first one is one from our partners in India. We work with some partners called Civic Data Lab, in which what they did is that they use not only, they work towards opening procurement data in the state of Assam in India, but they also were able to use open data from other data sets. So we're speaking here about interoperability with other open data sets, and that is why it's key to work towards opening different data sets, not only one for procurement. And they were able to combine data sets related to population, to climate, to different types of risks, to build a data model to help decision makers identify and improve flood procurement. So they basically did this model where they identified which were the most vulnerable communities in Assam, and then they matched that with how funds were being spent towards preventing for flood prevention. So they did also this stakeholder collaboration with the authorities, where they gave that feedback in terms of data and used the data for improving decision making. So at the end of this project, and it's still ongoing, but the first result is that the authorities were able to allocate funds to the most vulnerable communities compared to previous years. So that is one example of how can you use procurement data. Then another one, and we have multiple examples about how procurement can be used to increase inclusion, specifically for groups such as women-owned businesses or other groups. And we have a great example in Colombia, in a city called Palmira, where the local government developed a strategy to work with local women-led businesses in a key sector that related to food procurement for the school meals. So in this case, they worked with these businesses to help them submit bids, to help them reduce the barriers for them to participate in procurement. So this was part of their reforms. And then they kind of helped them participate in the market. And at the end of this process, they realized that a lot more women of this local community farmers were being awarded contracts related to food procurement in schools. And then the third interesting use case is that we know in procurement, and when we speak about government finance data, there's always this anti-corruption angle, but we've seen great examples about using this data to monitor spending for anti-corruption, but also linked to a key use case. So in this case, we have a great example from Paraguay with a local organization called Reacción, which they basically monitor how public funds are being spent related to school infrastructure. And they also work with students on how to monitor that public spending and procurement. And they have several years doing this, and they have improved fund allocation in more than 80% of the schools in the city they work in Paraguay. So those are the key things. And I think the message here is that when we think about how we make this reform sustainable and what is innovative is, I think it's using this data towards achieving better services for communities, to achieving the SDG goals, and then just thinking about how can we make the best use of the data. And just to finalize, I think, of course, there's still challenges. I think a key thing is there's still a lot of digitization processes ongoing in different regions across the world. So I think it's key about thinking, how do you embed these transparency principles in this digitization so that we ensure not with digital services, but also digital services that have transparency embedded and that at the end could drive these goals. And of course, what I mentioned earlier, just trying to institutionalize those data efforts to have a more sustainable ecosystem, I think it's key in order to make these reforms sustainable over time.
Thank you, Camila. And you mentioned several examples. It would be great if you can add some links. Also, for everyone here, you can go to the page of Open Contracting and see the impact stories. They're great. With that, I would like to move to Aura. Aura, please.
Well, yeah, I agree that those cases are very useful and would be very good to have as inspiration. In the Global Initiative for Fiscal Transparency, we do a lot of that peer learning based on case studies to know what has worked and what has also been challenging in different contexts. I think in terms of, maybe not so well, some of it, all of them would be innovations, but some type of activities or practices that have been proven to have some good effect in our experience. One of them is working through indexes and standardizing and recognition effect. I saw in the chat someone was also putting about standards and how those being officialized has helped push this agenda a lot. I do think that both having indexes such as the Open Budget Index, the Global Data Barometer, amongst many others, help building a healthy competition both at national and subnational levels, bringing these agendas to the forefront. No one wants to be the one behind, and no one wants to be behind their neighbors. Also, I think engaging younger and broader audiences directly through targeted communication and dissemination strategies, like use of social media, as well as specific initiatives such as data challenge or direct products such as interactive user-centered platforms online that target specific needs or requirements, even in communication to younger and broader audiences that are not experts. We've done that in the GIFT network to specific activities called Data Quest and budget data rallies that are more targeting to infrastructure monitoring, as well as sustainable development goals, budget tagging. So those type of initiatives that are very much closer to a newer generation or what's happening on the ground, we've seen that are more effective on bringing data to the actual forefront and not being as cold or as distant as it can be. We also think that interoperability as a concept, but also as a practice, has been a huge innovation in many countries in terms of integrating the full budget cycle and not only having on one end expenditure, on other end of infrastructure, in other end procurement, in another end payroll information, debt information. So in countries where you see higher interoperability or even only pivotal data fields that can bring you from one information to the other, and that assist you in connecting different contextual data to whatever you want to put forth in specific agendas, such as was what we've mentioned, monitoring, anti-corruption, etc., has been rather than an innovation, an enabler for many types of users to be capable of understanding the data without having to be experts in public finance. And in that same sense, examples of connecting budgets to specific priority goals. So these sort of new, but in many countries it has already been started for a while, like public financial management in terms of priority financing, rather it being sustainable development goals as a whole, like in Mexico with all the budget tagging related to that, or in Colombia where you have budget tagging related to gender, child and youth, green budgeting, but also specific types of budget tagging that are very conjunctural, such as the peace efforts and peace building budget tagging that they have in Colombia, in Argentina, where they have budget tagging related to child and youth, very much hand in hand with UNICEF. And well, that's also to say that most of these efforts have been assisted by international cooperation. And this type of connecting public financial data to development and tangible development outcomes, and how do these affect people directly, is very much the forefront right now of what is going on in terms of connecting data and putting the data open to the public that is useful and impactful. In terms of what it's missing and how can we go further, I think that's exactly the point, how to have opening data and transparency in the public financial management realm being more impact oriented in terms of policy, not only in terms of just the principle of people's rights to information and the open data movement as a whole, but really how is this impacting policy, and in that sense policy that is related to ministries of finance and general public financial management stakeholders. So they are in charge to making our economies better, our economy sustainable and resilient and accountable to the people. So how do this information and the fact that it's open is assisting that in bringing policy and specific public financial management policy better? In many cases that are very successful in having the information out there, this is not clear to them, so they are not very sure on how to move forward. They say, I can put all the information out there and nothing happens. And that's, I think, where the transparency and open data promise has fallen short. And it's because, and that's why there is a growing level of disappointment. And in that sense, also a growing level of discourage and despair from the governments about this agenda. So moving forward, what we see is more push for policy impact-oriented openness rather than openness per se. And also, well, that to keep moving forward, we need to not bring any steps back. So we see from the Global Data Barometer and other tendencies that we need to strengthen legal frameworks to avoid loopholes. There is examples in Mexico, in Egypt, in many countries where there is increasing loopholes being used in freedom of information to hide public financial data, such as defense budgeting. So we see an increase worldwide of military and security and defense budgeting just being a field that is black. You cannot see anything inside. It's a black box. It's a very thick box, and nothing can be seen inside. And more budgetings worldwide are moving towards that field to avoid transparency and scrutiny from the public. So we need to strengthen legal frameworks. Not everything can be done by the military, or everything should be done by the military, and that in that sense cannot be an excuse. And also in terms of moving forward, we've seen, and the Global Initiative for Fiscal Transparency, we have a specific initiative called Fiscal Openness Accelerator that we've been working for the last 3-4 years in several African countries, and now Guatemala and El Salvador. In Africa, we are working with Nigeria, Liberia, Benin, South Africa, and Senegal. in implementing specific public participation mechanisms targeted to impact in the public financial management. Moving away a little bit from public participatory budgeting, which is a more traditional grassroots type of public participation in the budget cycle. We are targeting public participation to be impactful in terms of PFM mechanisms. So public participation in the building of macroeconomic perspectives, in the building of executing budgets, priorities, as well as in the building of performance indicators, and in the building of shadow budgetings that could be monitored by civil society. And in that sense, we are working with civil society councils instead of specific civil society agents to make it more sustainable and representative. And we are working towards that. We've seen very successful efforts, even if they take time. And I think that is also something to be thought about as we move forward in this movement. We kind of overpromised things that would be faster, and that's not really what's happening. Things sometimes take more time and take more capacity building and community building. Now we have, I think, a stronger community worldwide, but now we need to work towards reaping those benefits and make them more evident so that there is no backlash. And I think that's all on my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Aura. And Oluseun, please.
I mean, I take it heavily of the kind of work that we have done in terms of preparing and building engagements, specifically for building civic consciousness. I mean, our work is all geared to the fact that citizens must have the consciousness and the awareness to hold government accountable, and in a way, if we put our energy on the citizens, we can get kind of results that we want. So we are primarily about citizen consciousness. But something that I want to say about, if I look at the policy and the political factors that have driven interest, I feel multilateral institutions have a lot of work to do. Why I say this is because they have two things. They have the independence, as well as they have the incentive. So independence means you can say that they have political intentions, or you can say they have some higher ulterior motives when they demand for increased access to open data systems. And they have incentives. A lot of them are offering loans and offering a lot of money to countries in Africa, and they could as well embed these kind of conditionalities as part of the use of funds. Because I mean, if I give you $1 billion, I should know how those funds are spent, and that openness or accountability towards those resources, it should not just be to myself or to the multilateral institutions. It should be open in the open, where citizens who are the beneficiaries of such fund, they should be able to contribute into the debate. So, and I'll give an example. For years, budget advocated that state budgets should be open, like subnational budgets in Nigeria should be open. And it was difficult because there is no legislative framework that compels state governments to open up their budgets to the public. At the federal level, which is at the central level, there is a Fiscal Responsibility Act that mandates the federal government to publish its budget with some level of detail. But at the state level, there is nothing that compels them, except we want to go through the long, winding constitutional process to make that happen. And we've tried that once in a while. Nobody wants to bite that bullet. So what happened was this World Bank set up a program, and we made effort that we moved state being open, which means we just did public persuasion and naming and shaming. We from 3 out of 36 states, we got 19 out of 36 states to open their budgets. You know, we had this league table. You know, it was like when you were trying to watch football and you have a list of players that are being named for a match. So we have this league table, this list of states, and we say these are the states that have not published, and we published their names in red, and we did a lot of spins around that. But what was most significant was when the World Bank came up with this $750 million CIFTAS program. And that program was geared towards that states would get some sum of benefit if they met some certain transparency and accountability criteria. And part of that was budgets, was audits, was was procurement data and the rest of things like that. And that's transformed significantly. Because now you have to be more, you are supposed to be open. It's a democratic system, but we know that there are challenges to that. But now you have maybe $10 million just lying around, and you just don't want to miss out of that party. So in a country with a lot of or cash crunch, you have to get yourself to be open. So I believe that one of the
I lost Oluseun. I don't know if it's only me.
Yeah, me
I
too.
can hear you, Oluseun. Can you please activate your mic? I think it got muted.
I got muted. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
I think something's still wrong with my microphone settings. I'll fix it. So, like I said, more of the thinking came up heavily from multilateral institutions like the World Bank, putting an incentive down that things must change, and that trend came significantly. Secondly, you also see that you have the maturing civil society space has also been helping. So civil society demanding much more locally is helping out. Wrong here. You have to just a second. Let me see if I can. Okay. I don't know what's affecting but I would say I'll keep trying. You have the civil society space where they are also a critical part of challenging and demanding more effective and a much more quality accountability. So it's very, very important that the local civil society space is cultivated to demand, because what I've seen in much more developing democracies is that without enough effective demand for some of these data, there is no willingness or incentive to publish. Even if you put them in the laws, people would agree, but they might publish things that don't meet those 4 principles that we mentioned: comprehensiveness, accuracy, timeliness, and also actionability. People might not publish to meet those criteria. And so you get a data that just doesn't strengthen any form of debate or doesn't incentivize any level of action. So it's very important that we also strengthen the maturity of the civil society space, especially at the subnational level. It's also helping cultivate to open data. And I think finally is tech, technology. We're also seeing the growth of civic tech ecosystem within these countries, which also is helping a whole of accessibility to this data and breaking it down in simple bits. So not just budget is doing this work. We have connected development. We have which have built the follow the money. We have CJID, we built Udeme. We have ProMad, which built GRAP. So different people are also building. We have PPDC that built Pudeshi. So different groups are also building civic technology tools on the base of this data. So it gets much more civic awareness and an uptick. So I feel those are the kind of things that are transforming the space significantly. Apologies for the microphone challenges. Thanks.
No worries, Oluseun. Thank you. So now we're gonna move to some questions. I do have several, but please, for all people joining the call, you can also leave your questions in the chat. Well, I have 3 questions. Well, 4 general questions, building on some of the things that you mentioned. So I'm gonna start with one, and it's with the goals point that was highlighted by Camila, and the question is how to support governments and these different actors in really setting clear goals and really goals that are achievable, that can be traced, and that you can show some impact. Like, what are the keys in those reform goals, and how you can help them people achieve that?
Yeah, so I think a lot of these goals, when we start, let's say, a project with a partner, sometimes it's goals that they already have, let's say, they have this policy goal in their overall programming on, I don't know, increasing more sustainable procurement. So they have like this broader idea. And what we help them is, okay, how do you narrow down that goal? And as you said, in working towards, depending on what the project looks like, and how do you actually implement that in practice? So sometimes that's the case. Governments already have some set priorities, and then we design a support project, a joint project where we help them implement some of those goals. In other cases, I think it's part of that multi-stakeholder collaboration effort, I would say. So you might have, for instance, a lot of these goals or commitments come from broader national government plans, or like the OGP commitments, which are built together by civil society and government. So in those cases, those goals can come, in a more collaborative way. And also we've seen, so for instance, we have this impact accelerator program that is called LIFT, that it's basically an effort that we worked through in 18 months with different partners. But a key thing is that it has to be a multi-stakeholder group. So it's not only government, but there need to be other stakeholders, and they have to work together towards defining that goal. And a key thing there is just thinking about that feasibility of the goal and how do you actually track. So it's really key when you set that goal to embed the thinking about how you're going to measure and track if you succeeded in achieving or if you're making progress towards the goal. So I would say those are like the main key things that we see on the field. And of course, if you're able to have those goals in a robust mandate, in a legislation, in a decree, in a policy document, that's even better, because you have that push, let's say, you have that obligation to implement those reforms as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Camila. Oluseun, Aura, do you want to add anything on defining those reform goals and how that can help the achievement of this process on opening and using data?
Yeah, I think in terms of defining goals, it has to be about improving the quality of life. I mean, that's the way I see about when we talk about data. It does. We always look at our working budget and we narrow it to just one line. The quality of life has to improve. Either hospitals are built, schools are built, roads are built, climate investments are made, people's life must change. So I think once we're able to narrow down to that kind of that, it's all about quality of living in a much more sustainable way. We can now decide what do we need to build on top of that. And what we need to build on that is more of solidarity, more of consensus, because democracy is getting to the point that it gets, even when you raise concerns about this, it gets maybe antagonistic. It gets as if you're asking for too much, or you're demanding much more than the expected ideal. But we also have to be a place where we have consensus and solidarity and nuanced conversations that we just want to make sure that the lives of citizens get better. So I feel like some of the reform that we need to do has to do with efficiency. A big point about public sector funds have to be more efficient in terms of and credibility also. Projects can't just be at variance within what is obtainable in normal markets. So public government should also drive efficiency and credibility in terms of project credibility, in terms of procurement efficiency, and in terms of disclosure. Should be just much more open as much as possible. And if all of this is wrapped around community engagement, the kind of reforms that we really want would happen. Yeah, thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Oluseun. Aura?
I agree a lot with both Oluseun and Camila. I think many of these goal setting comes from standards or already existing frameworks of what needs to be published and what will be published in the upcoming future. But just to mention something different and more towards what Oluseun was mentioning, in our Fiscal Openness Accelerator project, where we have both the openness of information, depending on the country, it would be data if they are a little bit more advanced. If not, it would be documents if they are a little bit more behind. But also public participation mechanisms. We do have public, what we call advisory committees that are made out of civil society organizations that wish to participate in these efforts and collaborate directly with the Ministry of Finance in this case, specifically towards setting goals and specific, specific pinpoint and indicators of what they want to do and thresholds of what they're going to do in a matter of 1 year or even 2 years, which assists in this case both to have community-driven goals, but also for these community-driven goals to be more realistic and to be previously assessed and taken into consideration and discussed with Ministry of Finance authorities, so that you work with what can be done. Of course, trying to set ambitious goals, but not to always set the bar so high that it's just a discussion that will never happen and setting yourself for disappointment. And in this sense, governments will not go for those goals, right? Because they don't want to say they fail. So these advisory committees, where they discuss and the model is set and helped by international cooperation community, also assist in building together indicators and performance metrics and goals that would be attainable, but yet community and government together will set them up.
Thank you, Aura. And now moving to the second question that I have, and this comes from a couple of things that Oluseun mentioned, and is the importance of making the data really actionable, and that really people can engage with it and use it. And also to what he said about the incentives for advancing this kind of efforts, incentives coming from multilaterals, like in the case of STIFTAS that he mentioned, examples coming from CSOs, pressuring for the data and using the data to advance the pressure, and the technology environment, so like the ecosystem. I would like to hear a little bit on your experiences on using all those incentives to really make a process that provides actionable data and that people can use the data. So anything that you want to share in terms of what has been useful, what has been important, and how have you approached that? Maybe starting with you, Oluseun.
Yeah, I was expecting you to start with me. All right, cool. But I mean, so what we did was that we built community around data. And I think that's what we have to do. I think we've not done enough of that. And I know there were people like Open Knowledge Foundation that did that. I mean, very early days of budget. And I think this exists. I'm still one of the key leaders in Nigeria. And I feel like we need to just build more community around data to be able to do. We do less hackathons these days. We do less data mining, data analysis, and we have much more improved tools than we used to have less than a decade ago. So we need to be much more strong community. And what we did in budget was we have built budgets. So you can see public budgets online. We have built tracker, which means you can track those projects. We have also brought out spending data, but we also don't want to take it for granted that somebody's going to use it. So what we did was to have what we call the Gulf Spends Fellowship. So we created a Gulf Spends Fellowship where we 12 fellows that we are working with and we are partnering with to be able to use the data, and they're writing groundbreaking stories. You understand? Groundbreaking stories around people. For example, there's a story on someone who that was the construction of a classroom, but the money was given to a restaurant to do. So you have us building things like gospel in a way. I will share a link into that. So you have where you give a sanitary pad contract to a engineering company. So with something that has to change, it has to be fact that we not just leave the data alone, but we build a community to harness the data, to build engagement, to be conversation around data. That's extremely very important. The second thing I also think is critical is digital media. So in a country like Nigeria, where I'm from, Twitter is a very strong voice in trying to hold government accountable. And so we also have to use our personal voices, our official voices, to be able to accelerate the conversation about these things. Because if we don't talk about it, we don't signal the society towards efficiency in some sort of way. I mean, people just feel like their bad behavior is just going to be continuous and can be condoned. So it's extremely important that we're more clear-eyed and we're much more purposeful in that using digital media to accelerate conversion or engagement is also something that we put heavily on the table. And thirdly, is also to find allies in government. So it's not just all about that we are fighting and we are in this fisticuff with government. No, the people we're also open to change, we're also open to improvement. Being able to find spots of allies in government that we can work with to improve the process and show as a primary example to other people is also something that is worth testing and what to try at the end of the day. Yeah. Thanks, George.
Perfect, Oluseun. Thank you. Camila, Aura.
I think I would just add, I would +1 to what Oluseun is saying on the community. I guess a key thing to make data actionable that we've seen is to make the government use the data and identify, to show them how valuable data it is for them, because at the end, it's probably going to be the government agency, the one that's maintaining the publication. So if you're able to show them how valuable that information is to their current processes, and you do this change management about how they can use data to improve their processes and show results, I think in those cases is where we've seen that publication becomes more sustainable and it's easier to push for improvements. If nobody within the agency is using the data set or does not know what's even there, I think it's harder to make these reforms, like the data, actionable, as you said. And even the process of opening data, the change management process that goes through having a team within the agency thinking about how do you structure the data set and what fields to include, etc. I think that entails a change management process that I think it's quite useful. So if they become like the owners and the key users of the data that they're publishing, I think it's key to push for reforms and make the data actionable in itself.
Thank you, Camila. Ahora.
I mean, in this sense, I will just also second what both panelists have mentioned, the fact that you need to have both supply and demand, and both of them need to be very well aware of the usefulness of the information. I would just add to have broader stakeholders recognizing the value of the data. So in the case of public finance data, as in the very early introduction was mentioned, is one of the first open data that has existed and one of the first big data in terms of finance information. It's bank account information, all of that spending information. It's one of the first big data that was recognized as such and has been exploited and mined for the longest. So the private sector, the academia, the productive sectors are very much users of this information, and the usefulness, it's not always quite well documented. So I think bringing all of these stakeholders and documenting user cases that go broader than good intentions and let's say the more social and very good goals about improving our world, but also go to the self-benefit and economical benefit of many stakeholders. I think it's are also important, as not everyone will be interested in using information for good faith. And I think it's bigger if you actually prove that it's not the only use. As Camila was saying, there's procedural uses, but there is also self-benefit ones that I think they need to be more documented and well spread to be more impactful. Because I am sure that they exist, especially in the private sector and academia, but they are not as widespread. I think that's something to tap onto. Also, of course, second, adding myself to the previous messaging of the panelists, but this is just bring a new one to the table.
Perfect. Ahora, thank you. And the third question has to do with something that Aura mentioned, and is the integration of the processes behind the curtain, like the integration of the processes to generate the data. And I think that we have begun to touch on that with the ownership and the use by the same government. But I would like to know more, like what has been useful and how, like what advice would you give to the people listening to us in terms of promoting that integration so we can get more timely, more accurate data and more sustainable data as well. I don't know, Aura, this time I'm starting with you.
Well, I was a public servant for a lot a lot of time. So being a public servant, working with on this agenda, not by principle, because it was not what my office needed to do as their mandate, but as a way to improve processes. I think I have a lot of agreement with Camila on this, on the fact that the first users are public servants. And if public servants do not recognize the value, the information would be there just on maybe to check a mark, and then it's very much unsustainable. And in many times where backlashes occur, it would go away. So a key advice would be to do a lot of capacity building and culture building within public service. Well, while political will is difficult to manage or to push at many times, capacity building is always something that public servants want to do. And also be, from the other side, very mindful and patient on the fact that these people are always overworked. And collaborative approaches towards finding champions within the public sector and bringing their capacity building and their strengths and their stewardship over these goals is better than kicking them publicly and build these rather antagonist kind of non-collaborative schemes that most of the times end up on the very much more progressive or leaders on this agenda within the public sector to leave the agenda or to be forced out of office, which we have seen in many countries also happening. So you want to build collaborative approaches and bring this agenda forward in terms of processes and bringing open data, not as an extra work, but as a key component of the operations. It's mostly about collaborative approaches with civil society, built upon capacity building and highlighting the good practices rather than making opposition or antagonists, which is always helpful. But we need to be both ends of the table very mature in terms of what we want to achieve and how we want to achieve it. So I think that in terms, like from both ends of the table, having been both a public servant in the public financial management realm and also now being on this movement, I think we sometimes forget that this is people we're talking about, and we need to collaborate with people. We need to see them in a more like deeper way, not just as a role that it's antagonist. I think that would be my key takeaway from years of that. Collaborate. You catch more bees with honey, as they say in the United States.
Thank you, Aura. Camila, Oluseun, anything to add on that question?
I mean, that's a very thoughtful response, and for someone who's been in government, it's good to hear from that side or from that angle. Because I mean, I was in government just for 2 weeks before I had to resign, so you know, I don't think I can claim so much experience in government, but I'm always very, very clear that all of this is all just democracy at work, and democracy just being strengthened, and to ensure that we can get value for money, we can get efficiency, and we can get results for the people. That's my own thing. And then I don't know, civil society tone can be a bit adversarial. Like I said, we were fighting, but at the end of the day, it's just for us to be able to get a seat and table to understand that we're both served. It's in our best interest to engender trust in the society by just being much more open. and be much more open to the citizens about the situation of things. A lot of mistrust, a lot of misinformation it happens in the dark, and that doesn't all go well for a much more progressive society. So I think whatever Aura said, it's perfectly fine. I defer to her point. Yeah, Camila.
I guess I would just add, in order how to better integrate that, and I'm speaking of procurement, but I think it applies to other data sets that should be disclosed, is that this data normally comes from a system, but sometimes people think about the system and then, oh, how do I pull data? So what we try to do, what we've been trying to do more recently is, let's say when you're thinking about the requirements of that system, we know that a lot of governments are now ongoing digitization processes. So how do you embed that transparency thinking from the beginning on the planning of procuring that system, like an EGP, let's say? So it's really key to have that thinking about, if I'm gonna have a digital system, then what is the data that I'm gonna be collecting in that system? How can I export that? How can that data be useful? And having that thinking from the beginning, I think it helps better integrate those practices that at the end, normally when we talk with governments, is systems do not change every year. It's something that is going to be embedded in their practices for quite some time. So it's really good when we're thinking about this transparency initiatives and digitization processes, is how do you embed these principles from the beginning so that they are sustainable over time, and we're not struggling 5 years from now on, oh, this is, we can export any data from this and we can track our progress or anything. So I think that's a key thing to keep in mind, I would say.
Perfect. Thank you, Camila. Well, hey, I'm sure you have many things more to say, and I have many more questions to ask, but the time is running out. So thank you, Aura, thank you, Camila, and thank you, Oluseun, for coming. Thank you to the Data for Development Network and Muchiri for organizing this series of events and giving space for this conversation. And I'll pass the word to Muchiri for the closing.
Thank you so much, Jorge. If this was an in-person meeting, this is when I demand a standing ovation for all of you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, and I'm sure we're quite inspired and enlightened, and also just hearing from people who've been in the space from both sides, from within government, Aura, and from the outside as well. I think some empathy, is invaluable. Thank you for that. That really resonated with me, especially because of the work we're currently doing. There are people on the other side of this as well. So thank you once again, Aura, Camila, and Oluseun, for such invaluable contributions, and thank you for leading this, Jorge. We look forward to doing this again sometime soon. For those of you who are wondering what all that business about global integrity was about, the announcement was that global integrity is shutting down at the end of this year. It's end of this year, Jorge, right? Yeah. But the standards and the work Jorge and the team have set over the existence of the organization has been invaluable to the space. So once again, hats off to you, and we look forward to meeting again on these streets. Thank you everyone for making time to join us on this dialogue on government finances. As you might well know, this series of roundtables are seeking to foster a series of dialogues on the current state of open data and how it fits into the broader data for development agenda, and also in the process identify new and emerging developments and issues that the community should stay abreast of and probably work on. So tomorrow, same time, same place, not the same link, there's a different link. We will be hosting a dialogue on urban development. So if you can join us, please do. It will be an interesting conversation on the state of data in the context of urban development. And we look forward to learning a great deal from that panel as well. You have set the bar, and team. So let's see what happens tomorrow. If you can, of course, please do join us same time on Zoom. This was live streamed and recorded. So for those of you who didn't catch the whole session or looking forward to reliving the experience, please do check us out on YouTube, the Data for Development Network, D4D Network. You will find the recorded session there. So thank you once again. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.